The desert wind swept across the dry lake bed of Nevada's high plateau, whispering through sagebrush and red rock as if carrying secrets too old to speak aloud. At the edge of this emptiness stood a small, weathered hangar, its paint bleached. By sun, its windows dusty, its door slightly ajar. Inside, beneath a tarp draped over an old Cessna 172, sat a woman no one had seen in 15 years. She was in her late 50s now, hair silver at the temples, hands lined with time, but her eyes sharp. Steady calm still held the sky. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Vance. To the locals in the tiny town of Rachel, she was just the quiet woman who taught physics at the community college, volunteered at the library, and hiked the hills before dawn. But to those who once flew with her, she was Starlight, the only female pilot in her squadron to complete 200 combat support missions without a single citation for error. The one who could thread a jet through a canyon at night with nothing but moonlight and instinct. The one who vanished the day the war officially ended, leaving behind only a folded flight suit and a note that read, "I've given enough sky. Now I need Earth." No one knew where she went. No reunions. No interviews. No social media. She simply disappeared. Till last week, when a former wingman, now a retired colonel, spotted her photograph in a local newspaper, standing beside students at a science fair, holding a model of the solar system. He didn't call the press. He didn't post online. He drove 300 miles in silence and stood outside her classroom, waiting. When she saw him, she didn't run. She just nodded, as if she'd been expecting him all along. Now, sitting in the hangar with a thermos of black coffee between them, he asked the question everyone had wondered. Why did you leave? She looked out the open door at the vast, empty sky, the same sky she'd once commanded with flawless precision. "'Cause flying 200 missions doesn't make you a hero," she said softly. "It just makes you tired." She explained that she hadn't left out of shame or fear, but out of love for the sky she'd served, and for the peace she'd never allowed herself to feel. Every mission had been necessary. Every decision weighed in seconds. But after the final debrief, when the medals were handed out and the speeches made, she realized something. She'd spent her life ensuring others came home, but she'd never learned how to come home herself. So she walked away not from duty, but from the noise of it. She changed her name legally, earned a doctorate in atmospheric physics, and chose a life where the only thing she guided was curious minds toward the stars, not weapons toward targets. Her old squadron had tried to find her. Some thought she'd died. Others believed she'd been recruited into something deeper, quieter. But the truth was simpler. She'd chosen silence because silence, after years of radio static and engine roar, was the only language her soul understood. The colonel listened, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small framed photo. It showed 6 pilots standing on a sun-baked tarmac, arms around each other, flight suits unzipped, grins wide despite the dust and fatigue. Eleanor Starlight stood. In the center, helmet under one arm, eyes bright with purpose. "We never replaced you," he said. You weren't just a pilot, you were the standard." She touched the glass, her finger tracing her younger self. "I wasn't perfect. You didn't need to be," he replied. "You just needed to be there, and you were. Every time." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the tarp over the Cessna. She hadn't flown in 15 years, not even once. But the hangar wasn't empty by accident. She kept the plane not to fly, but to remember. Its wings were silent, but they still held the shape of her past. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in deep violet and gold, she walked with the colonel to the edge of the lake bed. In the distance, the lights of Nellis Air Force Base glowed faintly, whirled away, yet achingly familiar. "They're naming a new training protocol after you," he said. "Starlight Standard, for judgment under pressure, for calm in chaos." She shook her head. "I don't deserve that. You don't get to decide that," he said gently. "Legacy isn't yours to refuse. It's theirs to honor." Looked up at the first stars blinking awake Orion. Cassiopeia, the North Star, the same constellations she'd used to navigate before GPS, for everything became digital and distant. And in that moment she felt it. Not the pull to return, but the peace of being remembered correctly. Not as a weapon, not as a legend, but as a woman who showed up, did her job, and chose to walk away with her humanity intact. The next morning, she received an email from the Air Force Historical Foundation. Would she consider sharing her story for an oral archive, not about tactics, not about missions, but about what it means to serve, and then to stop, to carry duty without letting it consume you? She almost said no. But then she thought of her students, the ones who asked, "Can someone like me fly someday?" And she realized her silence had protected her, but her voice might protect them. Because they needed to know that courage isn't just about going. Sometimes it's about knowing when to land. And so, for the first time in 15 years, Eleanor Vance Starlight began to speak. Not loudly, not for fame, but for the ones who would follow, so they'd know that the sky doesn't own you unless you let it. She had finally given it back. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Skies of Destiny. The recording session took place not in a studio, but in Eleanor's classroom after hours, desks pushed aside. Soft lamplight replacing fluorescent glare, a single microphone on the teacher's desk. No uniforms, no medals on display, just books, star charts, and a model of the Earth slowly rotating on a stand in the corner. When the Air Force archivist asked her to begin, Eleanor didn't recount dogfights or danger. She spoke of cloud formations over the Hindu Kush, how the light changed at 30,000 feet just before dawn, of the weight of responsibility when your decisions affect lives you'll never meet. Flying wasn't about speed or skill, she said, her voice calm, measured. It was about trust. Trust in your training, trust in your crew, trust that even in chaos, there's a right choice. You're quiet enough to hear it. She described how, after her 200th mission, she sat alone in the ready room long after everyone left, staring at her flight log. Not with pride, but with exhaustion not of the body, but of the soul. She realized she'd spent years answering the sky's call, but had never listened to her own. So she chose silence. Not as rejection, but as renewal. The archivist asked if she regretted leaving. She paused, then smiled faintly. Regret implies you'd do it differently. I wouldn't. The sky needed me then. The Earth needed me later. Word of her participation spread quietly through aviation circles, not as a comeback, but as a gift. A cadet at the Air Force Academy wrote to ask if Starlight was real. Eleanor replied with a single sentence, "Real isn't about fame. It's about showing up when it matters, and stepping back when it's time." That letter was later pinned to a bulletin board in the cadet lounge, framed beside photos of legendary pilots, not because she demanded it, but because her words carried a truth many young aviators hadn't yet learned, that true mastery includes knowing when to land. Back in Rachel, her students noticed a change. She didn't speak of her past, but she began weaving lessons about navigation, weather systems, and decision-making under pressure into her physics curriculum. When a shy girl asked if she'd ever flown a jet, Eleanor simply said, "Once, a long time ago." But the sky isn't just for pilots. It's for dreamers, scientists, poets, anyone who looks up and wonders. The girl later built a weather balloon project that reached 90,000 feet. She named the payload Starlight. That spring, Eleanor received an invitation not to a ceremony, but to a small gathering at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. A new exhibit was opening, Voices of Service, Stories Beyond the Cockpit. Her recording would be featured alongside those of medics, engineers, and rescue crews people whose heroism lived in choices, not headlines. She almost declined, but the colonel called again. "You don't have to go for them," he said. "Go for the ones who think service ends when the uniform comes off. Show them it just changes form." So she went. Not in uniform, not in flight gear, just in a simple dress, hair pulled back, no fanfare. When she arrived, she found her old squadron waiting not to parade her, but to thank her. One by one they approached, not with salutes, but with quiet words. "You taught me to breathe before I react. I named my daughter after your call sign. I still use your checklist before every flight. She listened, eyes glistening, and for the first time accepted their gratitude not as a burden but as a bridge. Later in the exhibit hall, she stood before a display labeled *Silent Wings, the Starlight Standard. It featured her flight log redacted, a photo of her Cessna in the Nevada hangar, and a quote from her recording, *The sky doesn't demand your life. It asks for your presence. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give it back. A young woman in an Air Force ROTC uniform approached, hesitant. Ma'am, do you ever miss it? The flying? Eleanor looked at her the same age she'd been on her first solo flight and nodded. Every day, but missing something doesn't mean you need to return to it. Sometimes you honor it by letting it live in someone else. The cadet smiled. Then I'll fly for both of us. Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder. Fly for yourself, but fly with heart. On the flight home, she sat by the window, watching the clouds drift below. No longer a commander of the sky, but a witness to its beauty. And that was enough. Back in Rachel, she returned to her routine grading papers, hiking the hills, sipping coffee at dawn. But now, she left the hangar door open, not because she planned to fly, but because the wind deserved to move through. In one evening, as she stood on her porch watching the stars, she heard the distant hum of a jet passing overhead, high and steady. She didn't look up with longing. She looked up with peace, because she knew the sky remembered her. She remembered it. But she no longer belonged to it. She belonged to the quiet spaces in between the classrooms, the conversations, the choices that shaped the future without fanfare. Her 200 missions weren't erased, they were transformed into lessons, into legacy, into light for those still learning to fly. And in the end, that was the truest kind of flight. Not the kind that leaves the earth, but the kind that helps others find their way back to it. If you like the video, be sure to like it. Be sure to write your opinion in the comments at the end of the video.